Well, Gavin, Ben, and I are out on the lease today, just doing a few things. I'm trying to spend, at least one day or one day every other week, maybe, just getting some work done out here. And right now, we're starting just to move some cameras around. Just been around cameras obviously for a few months here, but just kind of bouncing around to different spots and just kind of learning the movement. This one's kind of just a for fun camera. There's this little walking bridge that goes across this creek here, and I'm just kind of curious to see what uses it as far as deer, turkey, or I'm sure raccoons and everything go across all the time, but it'd be kind of cool to get some pictures of deer coming across. Unfortunately, I did have a trail camera stolen already out here, this new lease, which is never a good sign, but hopefully that trouble doesn't continue. I'm gonna keep rolling here and get a couple other projects done today. My goal is to get right to where that tree Y's. This is that walnut tree that I've talked about hanging in before. If I can get right to where that Y's, when I come to hunt here, I'll be able to hang a cameraman stand on the back side of that Y. It should work out pretty good. Of course, you never know until you actually get up there, but it looks good from down here. That's a sweet spot. I really like it being up there. You can see a long ways, have really good shots to the main areas I think the deer will be. This is a little bit uncommon for me. Obviously, you guys know I don't hang a lot of pre-hung sets. I do a lot of hanging hunts, but this one just seemed like too much of a no-brainer with the access that I already worked on, clearing this ditch all the way up to this tree, and just how much of a travel corridor I bet this is. It's basically surrounded by creek on 3 different sides, so it creates this little peninsula. I still might put some food out here in this little spot just to sweeten it up a little bit, but even without it, I think it's going to be a good location, and I'm really excited to hunt it this fall. Well, as we get closer to planting season, I'm out here evaluating this spot that's a little bit higher on this property, and the spot that I'm likely to put a grain plot in, probably the only grain plot. And I'll probably start with soybeans this year. You can see just from the aerial shots how much water is standing across the rest of the property, where it's just basically lowland, and that's just from rainfall. The creeks haven't come out of their banks or anything. We've got a lot of rainfall over the last couple weeks, but I'm really trying to design this. The unique thing about how I'm trying to set this spot up is just from a bow hunting standpoint. If you take a big, let's say if I can get 4 acres in here, I might try to shoot for that. A 4-acre field and trying to bow hunt, it's very, very tough. So I'm trying to spend as much time on the front end planning how I could potentially bottleneck the front where the deer are going to come in and make the majority of the deer, I'm sure not all of them, they'll come from different directions, but make the majority of the deer come through a bow huntable spot. Maybe it's 50 yards wide right here between these 2 cedars before the plot opens up. Let them work past the spot where I'm likely to hunt. Good wind advantage over here, predominant winds from either north or west. Just those late season winds where this grain plot's going to be more attractive is the reason I want to stay on this side. So I'm just trying to think of, one, how do I keep them in bow range at least when they come by here and then they can open up, and then 2, my access. And so there's a lot of cedar spread around here, and in an ideal world, what I'd love to do is get a skid loader and a tree spade in here and kind of move some of those around just to create a little access wall or screen here just to get in and out clean. Because again, on the predominant wind side, I kind of have to come all the way through to this side rather than staying on the side that I access it from. So just trying to plan all that out before the work begins. And one thing, I am getting a little bit ahead of myself just to update you on the process. I've mentioned before, but this property is, for the most part, enrolled in WRP. There's a lot of WRP acres. It's an easement on this property. And anytime that's the case, it's just like the river farm. You have to have a compatible use agreement in place that basically states what you can do. Food plots, mowing, burning, those type of land management activities have to be approved on the easement. And I've been working for the last couple months trying to get that accomplished and in place so that I can actually plant food out here. And so far it has not got done. It's just one of those things, the process takes forever, trying to get a hold of the right people and get them to call you back and all that. So fingers still crossed that goes through. Like I said, we are getting close to planting season, but I'm excited about this spot because this neighborhood might not be the best from the standpoint of hunting pressure. I think there's a lot of hunting pressure, but it doesn't seem like the type of neighborhood where people are planning like destination food plots or late season food plots. So for that reason, I might be able to draw a lot of deer from quite a long ways away late in the season, which is pretty exciting to think about. So the work continues out here on this new property. Never ending list, but it's always a fun thing to do.
Well, it's been a long spring traveling around and doing a bunch of stuff with turkeys. So first I want to say I appreciate all you guys who have been following along and supporting the Chasing Red series. I've had an absolute blast between all the travel, hunting with new people here and there, and getting to chase them all around the country has been truly special. So the season's winding down here for me. I'm finally back home, but I did want to say I appreciate everybody following along. With that being said, the spring is always a really good time for me, a really good time of reflection. And with talking about reflecting on this past season, one thing I tried new this year that I've never done before is use a deer decoy. So I want to take a few minutes and touch on kind of the lessons learned from this past season for myself and maybe some things I'm thinking about trying this upcoming season. There's a few technical details that I had to educate myself on when I first started using that decoy, and placing the decoy was one of the things I struggle with the most as far as what people say about facing it certain directions. Throughout the season, I didn't really see personally any significance to some of the minor details. I always obviously want to use the decoy and put it upwind of me and give that buck a little bit of opportunity to circle downwind of that decoy in between me and the tree, ideally presenting that nice close range bow shot. But as far as which way I faced the decoy, I didn't see too much significance. One thing I did like is being able to face the decoy in the general direction of where I thought the deer were coming from. As far as for me in using the most realism, I like that decoy to be facing directly at that deer, especially when I start inserting calling and whatnot. I think it just paints a little bit more of a picture that that decoy knows that that buck is there, and being able to call directly at him, it's almost a little more assertive or a little more defiant, and hopefully give that deer a little more confidence to come in and check it out. So with spraying it down, I'm not a huge scent control freak or whatnot. I sprayed down the decoy occasionally. One thing I did use more often than not was a little bit of buck scent, whether it's just some mature buck urine or something like that I'd put on maybe the tail of the decoy or on the ground right underneath. That way, in case a deer did circle downwind, maybe they'd catch that and believe it a little more. When choosing a stand location when I was using the decoy this past season, I didn't do necessarily anything different than I would do on any kind of bow hunting setup. I'd like to have some kind of barrier to where the deer can't get downwind, and like I said, that's no different from how I'd set up on an October hunt. I like hunting the edges of ditches or something like that, or steep drop-offs to where I know the deer aren't going to go downwind, and that definitely still plays true with using the decoy. I like having it out in front of me and some kind of barrier or blocker behind me to where the deer aren't going to come from downwind. The main differences in my setup when I chose to use the decoy were more specific to the terrain that I was hunting. A couple of those farms that we picked up more or less don't have a ton of cover or a lot that really holds the deer there. They're just kind of spaced between two other good blocks of woods. And so that's when I decided to use that decoy the most, is in those open type terrains. I did try it a few times using the decoy in the woods or in small food plots, and I did not have very good luck at all. Actually, a lot of times had very bad responses from the deer, and I think a lot of that comes with just surprising that deer a little more. If they can't see the decoy from a ways away, it almost tends to just be two right there in their face, and they got a little spooked. And that goes the same for using a decoy in a destination type area. I tried it a couple times hunting over food, whether it be a cut ag field or whatnot, that I know a lot of the deer were kind of headed to late in the evenings, and I did not have very good luck with the decoy there either. A lot of times the deer, it seemed to be, at least for me, when they spend too much time around it, they very quickly figure out that the gig is up, and they didn't like it very much. But where I did have the best success with that decoy was in those wide open type scenarios. I can think of a couple hunts that I'll talk about briefly. And actually both of those hunts took place just a couple hundred yards from each other. The first hunt, Grant and I went into that new farm and we chose to set up along this little skinny ditch, this little tiny finger of timber that connects one bigger block to another. So we set up in that little location knowing that we've been seeing quite a big group of does feeding through this cut bean field alongside of that edge. And knowing the time of year, I believe it was October 30th, we knew those bucks would starting to be getting curious and wanting to check those doe groups out. But with that stand location and that farm, there's nothing really in that 50-acre field or whatever it may be that draws a deer to one specific spot. It makes it really tough specifically for a bow shot. So we chose to bring the decoy that night, and sure enough, the big doe group came out that we've been seeing, and with them was a really good deer, a deer that we have a few pictures of, a really nice 6x5. And unfortunately that deer never did close the distance and give me a bow shot, but I still think that decoy really worked. I could see just the top of that deer's back and the tips of his antlers for a long time, and with having that decoy there, I chose to call at him. And sure enough, he did close the distance, maybe 50, 60 yards, still a ways out of bow range. But I think a lot of that reason he didn't commit is that he had that doe group with him, and so he didn't really feel the need to leave them to come check me out. But I still count that as success with that decoy. I really don't think he would have even came that far without having something for him to look at. And so I took that moving forward and altered my setup just a little bit. About a week later, I went back into the same farm and moved just about 200 yards away up to the very top of that ridge that 6x5 was kind of running. I got set up in this island of trees and set the decoy out just a little bit in front of me, right on the top of that ridge line where it can be seen from about 360 degrees. And that's the hunt that you guys saw back in the beginning of November, where that deer came in and laid down that awesome snort wheeze vocalization. There was another really awesome key to that hunt, and something I never really seen play out before, and that was the fact that I called at that deer over an hour before he actually came in to check out the decoy and my setup there. That's something that I saw just right before that, I believe, in Owen's hunt for the Stickers buck. I remember him calling at that deer and not really getting much of a reaction out of him at first. And then several minutes later, if not even an hour later, that buck actually came back. And that's the same scenario I saw play out with this buck here. I called at him. I know for a fact he heard me. He turned his ears. He turned his head even for a minute, but more or less acted like he didn't care. And sure enough, like I said, about an hour later, what he did was make a giant loop and come right back to that location that they heard that calling from. And right there in that scenario, I really feel like the decoy sold it for me there. Like I said, it's wide open in that spot, but seeing that decoy there, as you guys can tell from the footage, he got pretty ticked off, came in, and that turned out to be one of the coolest hunts I've ever been a part of, and definitely the coolest one of the year. But going forward in this coming year, I have a lot more confidence than I ever had in using a decoy. You know, it's something I've always wanted to try, and I know for a fact I'm going to take it a bunch this year, probably back to that same farm with that open style terrain. It is one tactic that I think is utilized very well in a certain time of year and then not so well in other parts. And for me, that's that late October through the middle, late November time frame when the bucks are aggressive, they're looking for does, they're fighting for that dominance. And that's the time of year that I really think I'll use it going forward. So going into this year, I definitely plan on utilizing that decoy a lot more. I think there's a lot of setups that I've made in the past that I realize I wish I would have had one. And I've also learned when not to use it. I think using a decoy is one of those things where it can be a confidence builder, and it's a trial and error type thing. You have to figure out what you like, maybe what works for your area, and what have you. So I'm definitely planning on using it this year. I definitely encourage everybody else to potentially get one, give it a try. It definitely could be something that helps you seal the deal. With that being said, we appreciate you guys watching, and we look forward to seeing you back here next week.